Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the April 2024 Pentair CAD training. The topics for this month are sites, feature lines, and surfaces. Just like the last couple months, we are recording this. It's going to be posted to YouTube so everyone can refer to it later and we can use it for onboarding new people moving forward. I emailed out a path to some sample files in our handout, and there's also an outline of the CAD exercises that I have put together for this. So if you lose your place at some point, you can go back through and follow those as needed. I am going to mute everybody, but if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself or throw it in the chat. I'll try to pay attention to it. If I miss the message in the chat, just unmute and interrupt me. It's fine. Okay. So there's the path. It's on the S drive. Everything is there. And that is also the location where you can find any of the sample files and outline stuff from the previous trainings that we've done over the last couple months. So today, the first topic we're going to do is sites. We covered this back in February, but we're going to do a brief review because in grading within Civil 3D, the sites are really important. So just a quick refresher, we use sites kind of like folders to group Civil 3D objects. They're useful because we don't want certain types of objects to interact with one another, such as feature lines and parcels, because it'll mess up your surfaces, it can mess up your lots, and there's some other object types that could cause issues too, but those are the big ones we run into. As far as the objects that use them, the February session covers all of them, but the ones that really relate to grading are feature lines and grading objects. How or when to make a site when grading in Civil 3D. So just like when you would do anything that utilizes an object on a site, whenever you try to create that object, it's going to prompt you to either make a site or put it on one, which we will show in the CAD exercise. Why are sites important for grading? Again, they're going to prevent objects from interacting, adding extra PIs to feature lines, messing up labels on parcels, putting big spikes or holes in a surface, those types of things. All right, so moving on to something new, I'm going to talk about surfaces today. So the definition of a surface, according to Autodesk, is that a surface is a three-dimensional geometric representation of an area of land, or in the case of a volume surface, is the difference or composite between two surfaces. Surfaces, as we see them, are made up of triangles or grids, which are created when Civil 3D connects the points that make up the surface data. How do surfaces benefit me? Why does this matter? They're going to allow you to get three-dimensional information quickly and allow you to interact with that information without having to do a lot of manual calculations. They're easy to label. They're easy to interact with. You can change the way they look depending on your drawing scale, depending on what you're trying to show. You can incorporate colors, all kinds of different options that you can't do just from hand-drawn polyline contours. And then, of course, comparing surfaces to one another for earthworks, which John Hauser covered last month. Okay, so how do I create a surface? In our drawings, we typically have three main surfaces. Our existing surface, which comes from survey data, our proposed, which is based on our design that we're working on, and then a volume to get a rough earthworks number to make sure our design makes sense and can be cost effective and feasible. All of the objects that make up a surface, you can find them in the definition drop down in your tool space. Those objects are boundaries, break lines, contours, DEM files, drawing objects, point files, and point groups. Typically, we're really just going to use boundaries, break lines, contours, and point groups. at least within our proposed surfaces. In existing, which whenever we get to a base mapping training, we can go over. You would also use survey figures, but they're basically just fancy break lines. Okay, so our first exercise is going to be in exercise 1 surface creation file located on the S drive. For some background on what this is a file that has all the survey points and survey figures already brought in, and I added the figures to an existing surface already. Since this isn't a base mapping training, I wasn't going to go through that today. But we'll start with some manipulation of an existing surface. So I have it selected here. This style is typically what they're going to look like. They're going to be dashed lines, a gray color 8 line, and then a white line for the major 5 contours. So we're going to start by showing how to add a point group to a surface. So what I'm going to do is find that surface in tool space. So I'm going to expand surfaces. I'm going to find my existing surface and expand that definition. So here's that list of objects that we went over on our other slide. The break lines that are already there are the survey figures that I was talking about. So we're going to add our point group. So I'm going to go down to point group. I'm going to right click and I'm going to hit add. The point group we're going to add is called field data part 1. Typically in a drawing that's been base mapped or that you're base mapping, that file or point group is going to be named the same thing as your ASCII file. So it's going to have a job number, it's going to have probably the date it was shot and what we were shooting. But we're going to add this by hitting OK, and you saw the contours change. So now this is reading and triangulating between all of these points. So just as a quick example of what that looks like, I'm going to show you what the tin triangles look like. So all the surface is doing is literally drawing triangles between all of the points and all of the break lines, and then it's interpolating between them to create all of your contours. So we'll put that back to where it was. Okay, so that's adding a point group. Next step, we're going to add a boundary to this surface. So what I would typically do for an existing one is just outline around all of the survey points. Usually try to do it fairly close to them. This one's a little bit big, but we're going to go with it. So it's just a polyline. What I like to do is select the polyline first, then I go back into tool space. I right click on boundaries for my surface and I hit add. This is going to be an outer boundary. So what I typically do is name it, call it outer. And this checkbox is something that always trips people up whenever they're adding boundaries to surfaces. But as a general rule, this is determining whether it's going to trim the contours off at the nearest point to your boundary. So this is an outer one. I want it to be destructive, which means I want it to trim. So I'm going to uncheck the box. And we'll hit OK. And you can see, even though the boundary's out here, the surface stops at the closest point inside of it. That's going to be more accurate than leaving it checked, because it will just extend these lines out to the boundary, which might not be what they actually do in real life. So that's how we do that. Okay, next up we are going to freeze off these existing feature lines, which were generated by our survey data. That's just to clean this up so we can see a little bit better. And we're going to turn off our points, which to do that, we're going to click on point groups in tool space, right click, go to properties, and we're going to move our no display point group all the way to the top, which will turn these guys off. Okay. So next what we are going to do is create a proposed surface. So there's a few different ways you can create a surface. You can go up in the ribbon, go to the surfaces drop down and hit create surface. You can also go to tool space. You can right click on surfaces and hit create surface. They both do the exact same thing. So it's kind of whatever you get used to doing. So we're going to create a surface. I'm going to call this proposed. We're going to set our style. So it's proposed. We're going to use proposed contours, 1s and 5s. And we're going to talk about all those styles a little bit later. And we're going to hit OK. That creates a proposed surface. If you expand it, it's empty. It's basically just a folder for us to put data in that it's going to create everything from. So we are going to turn on our PR feature lines layer. So I'm going to find that in my list here. I'm going to thaw it. I've already drawn feature lines in here just for a basic, we're going to treat this as a building, and these two boxes like little parking areas. Obviously it's a little unrealistic, but for the sake of what we're doing, it's going to work just fine. Okay, these orange feature lines, they are break lines. So what I'm going to do is isolate these. Oops. All right, isolate them again. There we go. And I am going to select all of the break lines just by selecting similar. And I'm going to add to surface as break line from the right click menu. You can do it here, or you can go to break lines in tool space, right click and add. Does the exact same thing. You can name these. I'm just going to call them feature lines for this. But if you have a big site that has a lot of things going on, you might want to name it. If you have, for example, feature lines for a basin versus feature lines for some kind of a cutoff swale versus a parking lot, it can come in handy. Under type, we're going to leave standard, and this mid-ordinate distance by default should say 0.1, which is what we want. So we're going to hit OK. I'm going to bring my other layers back, and you can see I now have blue contours. It read my break lines that I have in here, and we're going to talk about where they come from in a little bit. But the whole purpose of this little parking lot is that everything is going to drain down to this low point in the center. This contour looks pretty good, but this one, realistically, probably shouldn't do this and have a little V-notch in it. It should be smooth from the face of curb to that ridge and then back down. So to fix that, what we're going to do is add some polyline contours just to clean things up. So I already drew them where I want them. They're the red lines in here. So I'm going to select both of those. They're just polylines, and I'm going to go into tool space, right click on contours and hit add. Here again, you can name it. I'll call it parking lot contours. Everything else in here should be fine, and we hit OK. And you can see it cleaned it up, made it look the way I wanted. So that's the basics on how to create surfaces and add data to them. So we'll switch back to the slides. Okay, so next, how do you modify a surface? The most common ways we usually do it is by adding more data, like boundaries, break lines, contours, and point groups. And depending on situations, maybe we'll paste surfaces using the Edit Surface contextual menu, which is what you see in the graphic beside the text. So now we'll jump back into CAD and we'll run through exercise 2 real quick. So this is the exercise 2 surface modification file. It is basically picking up where the other file left off, with the exception being that now there is an additional point group for this mound in the middle of the site. So this situation is not uncommon to what we see sometimes, where maybe we shot a site, but then we realize that there's something, maybe it's off in a corner that we missed, or maybe we didn't tell the crew that we really needed this the first time because we didn't think we did, but now we need it. So we sent them back out, they shot it, and we need to blend it together so that our existing surface, which currently looks like this from the last file, also shows this mound in it. So the way we are going to do that is with pasting a surface. It's something that you use in existing surfaces and in proposed surfaces, depending on what your project is. So the first step that I usually like to do is create a surface to turn into all of the blended surfaces so that you can preserve your original data in the existing and in this additional topo, which is this pile. So I'm going to make a new one that's going to be empty. It's going to be called EX Blended. Existing contours 1s and 5s is good, and okay. Okay, so here's existing blended. The definition is empty right now. And the first step we are going to do is paste the original existing in. Now the reason you do this is because it works kind of like layers. You want to take that base layer, the biggest thing first, and make that the bottom, and then we're going to put this pile on top of it. So to paste a surface, we need to select the surface that we're going to paste into. So we're going to select EX Blended by right-clicking on it in Tool Space and hitting Select. Then I'm going to go into the ribbon where it brought up a surface-based contextual menu. I'm going to go to Edit Surface, and I'm going to paste. Now, when this box comes up, you are selecting the surface that you want to put into your blended. So the first one I'm going to do is this original existing. I'm going to hit OK. And now you can see there's two surfaces right on top of each other, and they match, which is good. It means it pasted the way we want it. And now we are going to paste. So I'm going to grab EX Blended again, and we'll paste the pile on top of it. So we're going to Edit Surface, Paste Surface, and this one is Additional Topo. We paste it, and now you can see one surface. It has the pile in it. Looks exactly the way it should for these two being blended together. What you need to sometimes be careful of when you're blending surfaces is if there's a jump, like between the shots here and the shots that made up this break line, you could get some weird stuff with your contours. You kind of need to just run along the boundary of your surface to check. So for example, this right here, probably not great. They're a little too close together. That would need some cleanup, which you could talk to Survey or a design manager, senior designer who's done this a bunch, and they could probably narrow down pretty quick what needs to change to make that more realistic for what it's supposed to be. Same thing here. But for the sake of what we're doing, we're going to stop at that. Okay, so next we are going to turn off our survey points again. So we're going to right click on point groups and go to properties. I'm going to put no display to the top, apply, and OK. And I'm going to turn off the old existing surfaces because we don't need those anymore. So to turn off or make a surface no display, you select that surface. I usually do it in Tool Space, so I'll right click and I'll go to Surface Properties, and then under Surface Style I hit the drop down and I hit no display, which will be at the top of the list. You hit OK. I'm going to do it again for the existing, the old, so I'm going to right click, Surface Properties, hit the Surface Style drop down and go to no display, and OK. So now there's one surface, it has our pile, it has all of the original topo. I can put a boundary on this just like you can with your other ones. So I'm going to select the boundary I want. I'm going to expand EX Blended, definition, and I'm going to add a boundary. Call this outer. I want it to trim, so I'm going to uncheck the box and hit OK. And there you go. Okay, the next thing we are going to go over with modification is how to raise and lower a surface. This comes in really handy depending on what the earthworks might end up with for your project, especially on a simple site like this. So I'm going to turn on my proposed surface, which is the same one we created in exercise 1. So I'm going to go to surface properties for it, hit the drop down for style, and I'm going to put it to proposed 1s and 5s. So now you see it. It's the exact same thing, but let's just pretend we did an earthworks on it like we did in last month's training, and we have too much cut on the site. So we need to raise this surface. An easy way to do this is by selecting the surface, going to Edit Surface drop down, and there's a Raise Lower button. So this can kind of sometimes be guesswork, but I'm going to say I think my numbers are going to balance better if I raise it by 6 inches. So I'm going to add 0.5, apply it. You can see it updated all the contours and moved it all relative to what it was before just by that 0.5. So everything just raised. That's one way to modify a surface. So we'll jump back into the slides. Okay, so I'm sure you noticed whenever I was in the styles drop down for the surfaces, all of the many that we have in our template. The major ones that we're going to use are existing contours, 1s and 5s, proposed 1s and 5s, and then cut fill for volume surfaces. There may be situations, depending on the scale of your drawing, where you might also need to use existing contours 2s and 10s, or proposed contours 2s and 10s. Those are the major ones we use. Most of the other ones in there don't get used very often, so we're not going to cover them today. And then, okay, how do I label a surface? The major ways that we normally label surfaces are with contour labels, spot elevations, and slope labels, which we're going to demonstrate how to do that here in a minute. And then some tips and tricks. I'm going to show you rebuild versus rebuild automatic, which can keep your drawing from freezing up and crashing depending on what you're doing. And then locking surfaces, which is good for preserving data, especially on existing surfaces. And it can prevent you from accidentally messing something up without knowing, which can be easy to do. All right, what to do with new survey data midway through design. As it says there, this can be very project specific, but typically what I do is I'll bring new survey points into their own drawing and then quickly process them to see what exactly we shot and what the best way to blend it is going to be. Then I usually either import the points into the MD and process them, or I'll keep them in their own drawing and then use data shortcuts to blend the surfaces. And I believe data shortcuts is on the schedule to be a training here in the near future. But as a general rule, if you have this situation come up and you're not sure what to do, talk to your design manager or survey manager, and they can recommend how best to do it. Okay, so jumping back into CAD, we're going to jump into exercise 3 real quick, which is just labeling surfaces. So here is our exercise 3 file. It has our blended surface for existing already in it, and it has our proposed before we raised it 6 inches. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at these styles a little bit, and then we're going to label some existing contours, proposed contours, throw some spot elevations and slopes in, and then I'm going to show you rebuild versus rebuild automatic setting and how to lock a surface. So first I'll show you some styles. So we're going to look at our existing surface. You can change your style in a few places. You can do it by selecting and then going into your properties palette and hitting the drop down, selecting what you want. You can do it in tool space by hitting the drop down for the surface you want, going to surface properties and changing it here. So we'll do it here. It brings up the same dialog. So let's say this is a really big site and I need to show it at maybe 100 scale. I don't want it to look like 1s and 5s for the contours because you won't be able to read it on a plan. So in that situation, I might want to just show 2s and 10s. So all I have to do is change the style, hit apply, okay, and now you have much fewer contours to look at, which is going to clean up your plans a lot. For something at a smaller scale, we always show 1s and 5s. I'm going to put it back to 1s and 5s for this. The proposed ones work the exact same way. If I make this proposed 2s and 10s, it just changes the color and puts it on proposed layers, but it's basically displaying the same information, just in a different way. So we'll put this back where we had it originally, at existing contours, 1s and 5s. Okay, so we're going to start by labeling these existing contours. The way I do it, I go to Annotate in the ribbon, I go to Add Labels, I go to Surface, and I typically label multiple contours, so I'll go Contour Multiple. And since we have some steeper slopes here, I'm just going to label the major contours. So I'm going to go to the major drop down. It already has existing label style, which is what I want. For the minors, we're not going to worry about labeling those for right now, so I'm going to leave that as none, and user contour can be none. That's almost always none. I'm going to hit Add. Now it's going to prompt me to select the surface I want to label, so I'm going to click here. And now what it's basically asking you to do is draw a polyline, and anywhere your polyline crosses those major contours, it's going to add a label. So I'm going to cross these. You can see the labels come in, and you can just keep drawing. You can stop labeling it and start a new one if you want. I'll just add a few through here. These are intelligent labels, so if I change the scale of my drawing, you can see that they change too. So that's how you add those to the existing. Next, I think we'll label our proposed. So I'm going to go Add Labels, Surface again, Contour Multiple again. But this time, since there aren't a lot, I'm going to label majors and minors. So I'm going to hit the drop down for my majors and go Proposed Label Style. And for minors, I'm going to go Proposed Label Style. I'm going to hit Add, select the surface I want to label, and now I just go back to drawing my polyline. And there they are. So that's how you add contour labels. Next, I'm going to label some spot elevations. So just to show you again how you get to that label dialog box, in the ribbon we hit Annotate, Add Labels, Surface, Spot Elevation. We're labeling a proposed surface, so we're going to use these PR labels. The way the template is set up, you can label at different scales for enlargements. So these PR spot right 2-digit left or PR spot left 2-digit that don't say enlargement, they go on one layer. These ones that say enlargement go on a different layer. So you can label things independently if you need to and control it via layers, so you only see the things you want to see. The ones I typically use the most are in the grouping that starts at PR spot left 2-digit and goes down through PR spot right 2-digit enlargement TC. I'm going to show you the difference between these enlargement versus enlargement FC versus enlargement TC. They're the ones I typically use even if I don't have enlargements, just because of being consistent, because I like to use the FCs and TCs. What they mean are FC face of curb and TC top of curb. This helps someone who's reading the plan understand which point you are labeling, so they don't look at it and say, oh, that's obviously the top of curb elevation, and then maybe they end up building their parking lot 6 inches too high or too low because they interpreted your points wrong. So we're going to start by labeling the face of curb in one of our parking lots, and we are going to go FC, the marker style. It's a proposed surface, so we'll leave it on PR spot. If it was an existing surface, we could pick EX spot out of the list. We hit add, select the surface to label, and then we're just going to object snap where we want our labels to go. So there's our face of curb, face of curb, face of curb. We can just go around. So there we labeled the face of curbs for our parking lot. We'll label the top of curbs by going to our TC. And typically what I do is I add them all, and you can see they overlap each other. They don't look good at all. And then I'll go through and I'll modify, because you can grip edit these. So there's those. Next, we'll add some slope labels. So I'm going to change from label type spot elevation to slope. The one I almost always use is PR slopes ABS enlargement. ABS means absolute value, so you don't get that negative number shown, but you do need to draw your labels so that they're pointing downhill. Hit add, select the surface to label. Gives you two options, 1 point versus 2 point. If you select 1 point, it is just going to interpolate exactly where the slope is at that point on the surface. And there can be some variation because it's reading those triangles. Typically, I don't use that very much. I'll use the 2 point, which lets you control exactly where you draw it. So I'm going to draw one. I know that my parking lot slopes from here to here, so I'm going to draw a label. I'm going to snap parallel, and it gives me the slope along that curb line. I'll put one here, because it slopes down to the low point. Put one here. The other thing it will allow you to do is copy these labels. So I want one on the other side of the parking lot. I know that it also slopes the same direction along the curb, so I can drop it over there. It will update itself based on where you put it. So if I put one in the center, it puts a different slope on it than it would at the edges. So that's how we add these. One other useful thing whenever you're adding slopes to proposed surfaces is I'll turn on the feature lines, which I'm just going to thaw that layer real quick, and you can use that as a guide for where to snap your points to. So I mentioned these being fairly easy to manipulate. You can grip edit these, so you click on it, it brings up two grips. The diamond grip is where you are labeling. The top grip is how you control where the label is. So we can hit the top grip, we can drag this out and put them where we want. That's very useful if you're in a tight area like ADA, that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's some labeling. Next, we're going to run through rebuild and rebuild automatic settings for a surface. So the way you set that is by right-clicking in tool space on the surface, and you'll see these two options. If you hit rebuild automatic, it will automatically regenerate this surface anytime any of the objects changes. So for example, if I were to adjust one of these feature lines, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, but right now that's set at 4%. If I set that at 5%, you can see that the contours changed. I can do the same thing over here. If I set that at 6%, the contours all move. I can put it back, it'll stay where it is. If I turn off that rebuild automatic, seeing in the chat that people are having some buffering issues. I'm just going to keep rolling because it is being recorded for YouTube, so that way we can still post the video. If you miss anything, I'm guessing it'll be posted later today or tomorrow, so you can jump in and check. So that's rebuild versus rebuild automatic. If you don't have automatic turned on, you can make changes. It will not update. That can be useful if you're modifying a bunch of feature lines and you don't want it to buffer and change every single time you adjust a 1 point elevation. The other useful thing is locking surfaces. So where this really comes in handy is with existing. If I am base mapping and I finish manipulating the existing surface from survey data, I always lock it so I can't unintentionally make a change to it and mess it up. It's really easy. All you do is go into tool space, you right click on your surface, and you hit lock. If a surface is locked, you'll see this pencil with the red circle with the line through it. It will not let you change it, and it will pop up a dialog that says it's locked if you try to change it. To unlock it, you do the same thing. You right click on it, you hit unlock, that goes away, and then you're good to make changes. Typically, I lock existing surfaces as soon as I'm done creating them for base mapping, and I lock a proposed surface as soon as the design is pretty well complete, or maybe after something gets approved, I'll go back in and I'll lock the surfaces just to make sure there aren't any issues where something could inadvertently be changed. So that's styles and labels, locking, and rebuild versus rebuild automatic. Now we'll jump back into the slides and talk for a few minutes about feature lines. So Autodesk says that feature lines are 3D objects which can be used as grading footprints, surface break lines, and as corridor baselines. You can draw feature lines, convert feature lines from existing objects, and extract feature lines from alignments and corridors. Feature lines are usually drawn along curbs, ridges, or flow lines, building walls, sidewalks, etc. Basically anywhere that a grade break needs to happen. For what we do, our surfaces always represent finished grade, meaning the very top of the ground, and that is regardless of material. So finished grade could have lawn, concrete, pavement, curbing, all on the same surface. It's just that top level ground elevation that you're standing on whenever you're out on that site. Okay, how do feature lines benefit me? Feature lines are pretty easy to make. They're pretty easy to modify. They take a little bit of time to create, but once you have them, if you need to make tweaks, it's much, much quicker than manually calculating points and labeling them. It can also make your surface much more accurate for slope labeling, for earthwork calculations. They're really good for curb ramps, parking lot drainage, anything where you know you're going to have to modify those elevations and slopes. It's really nice. And when you combine it with grading objects, you can quickly create things like swales, adjust grading tie-offs, stuff like that. I saw a project within the last month being worked on where someone created a series of swales using feature lines and grading objects. And at one point they had to adjust the slope. All they did was type in a different slope for the center line and it spit out a brand new swale, tied it off to existing. It was pretty slick. Okay. So how do I create feature lines? There are several ways. You can draw them like a polyline. You can create them from objects, which are generally polylines that you already drew in your drawing. You can do it from an alignment, corridor, or from a stepped offset. I would say the most common ways we do it is from objects and then stepped offset and then probably manually drawn like a polyline. So how do I modify feature lines? There are a few different ways of modifying. In 2D, you can grip edit them just like a polyline. When you have arcs, you have to edit them similarly to the way we edited parcel lines that have arcs. You have to go in to a menu and use the edit curve command and tell it what radius you want to use, and it'll put everything where you want it. You can add or remove PIs, which are basically grips, adding more grips. And then you can add elevation points, which allow you to put grade breaks without changing geometry. 3D modifications, you can use the elevation editor, which we're going to show. In that, you can type in the slopes between points, but you have to pay attention to which direction the line is drawn, or you could end up running everything backwards. There's also a button to grade between multiple points at one slope or elevation. You can set elevations relative to a surface, and you can raise and lower entire feature lines similarly to the way we did on surfaces. And then there's a quick elevation editor, which is really nice when you're doing curb ramps and parking lots because you don't have to get in and out of several menus to change multiple lines at once, which we'll show as well. So now we'll do a quick exercise on feature lines, which we're going to use the exercise 4 feature lines file for. So if you open that up, you can see it's the same file again. This time I have the existing surface turned off. It just shows the proposed. It has some of the feature lines that we already made before, has some slopes and spots labeled so we can see what happens when we do some of these modifications. For the purposes of this, I am going to delete our polyline contours out because I don't want them to mess up what we're modifying. That is one thing when you're doing feature lines and surfaces. The polyline contour data that you add to your surfaces do not interact with the feature lines. So you will have to remove them from the surface or delete them from the drawing in the areas where you're going to modify feature lines. So we're going to start by creating a feature line. The first way we're going to show is by drawing. So what I typically do, I'll go to the Home tab in the ribbon. I'm going to go to Feature Line, Create Feature Line. You have to put it on a site. We're going to put it on proposed grading since it's for our proposed parking lot. The style, I leave it standard. The layer, we're going to put it on PR feature lines, and we're going to hit OK. So now basically you're drawing a polyline. All I'm going to do this time is draw the center ridge line for this side of the parking lot, and we're going to try to make it look a lot like this side. So I'm going to snap to the midpoint. It's going to prompt for an elevation. At this point, we're not worried about what that is, and typically I leave it at 0 and then I'll set them after I'm done drawing it. So you have to accept that elevation, so I'm going to right click. Then I'm going to snap to the other midpoint, accept that elevation, and exit the command. And you can see in my property here, it drew a feature line. Both points are at 0 elevation, and that's how you're going to draw them manually. Next, I'm going to show you how to make a feature line from object. So I'm going to make one for this face of curb. So I'm going to grab both of these polylines, and with those selected, I'm going to go to my feature lines drop down, and I'm going to create feature lines from objects. Same menu as before. I'm going to hit proposed grading for my site. I'm going to leave the style alone. It's on the correct layer. This is really important. There are certain times when you're creating from objects where you want it to erase the object. In this case, I do not because it's using the polyline that I want to be on the plan for the face of curb. So I'm going to uncheck that box and hit OK. And you can see it put 2 feature lines in here. They're exactly like the polylines, which are still underneath them. So that's how you create them from objects. Next, I'm going to create a feature line from a stepped offset. So I'm going to select the feature line I want to offset. And when you do, it brings up the contextual menu for feature lines. This button is your stepped offset. I'm going to click on that. It wants me to specify a distance. In this case, since it's a curb, it'll be the width of my curb. I'm going to use 0.875. and I'm going to tell it to offset to the outside, so I need to click a point outside of the feature line, and it wants the elevation difference. Typically, you're going to use whatever your curb height is. I'm just going to leave it at 0 for right now because I didn't assign any elevations to this yet. If I was grading this parking lot for a project, I would have assigned the elevations along the face of curb first, but I'm going to use it as a way to show you how to go back through and modify them to add them later. So that's an offset there. I'm going to offset this feature line by selecting it, hitting our stepped offset button. It saved my last used width, so I'm going to keep that. Select my side to offset, and there is that one. Okay. Now what we're going to do, we're going to add some elevation points to our feature lines. So I'm going to take this straight line that is the top of curb against the building. You can grip edit these just like you would grip edit a polyline, with the difference being whatever you grip it to, it is going to make the end point of this the same elevation as what I'm gripping. So you have to keep that in mind. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Most of the time it's going to make it 0 because your line work is probably at 0 elevation. So I'm going to grip these out to this corner where I want them. I'm going to do the same thing here with this one, and the same thing with this one, so that these all meet up. Okay. Now to add an elevation point, which is a point of grade break or a point of intersection with another feature line where you don't need to make geometry change. So like a point on a line, we're going to add it to where this sidewalk point intersects with our curb. So I clicked on the feature line, it brought up the menu. I'm going to go to Insert Elevation Point. Click on that. You just object snap where you want it. I want the end point here. It's going to ask for an elevation. I'm going to say 0 since I haven't set those yet, and then I right click to accept it. Now I'm going to do the same thing down here at this intersection. Add it. Okay. I'm also going to add one at the midpoint here because it is going to be the top of curb behind this ridge. So I can snap to the midpoint here and it'll put it along the line perpendicular to where you click. And I accepted that. I'm going to go through and add a couple on these other lines so I can have my ridge. So I'm going to add an elevation point here to the end point of my ridge line and accept the elevation. And we'll do it one more time for this one, for an end point here. And we'll do the top of curb by selecting Insert Elevation Point. And we're going to O-snap here. You can see when I move this, even though my cursor isn't on that curb line, it's keeping the insert point perpendicular to my cursor. So if I select this, it's going to be exactly perpendicular. And we accept that. Okay, so those have been added. Now I'm going to show you the elevation editor. So we need, in this particular case, I want the elevation of this feature line to be the same the whole way across. It's already set over here from before, so I know the elevation needs to be 615.90. The way I can edit that is by selecting the line you want to edit, and in the menu I select the elevation editor, and it brings up your elevations. The 615.9, you can see when I clicked on that, it put a triangle over that point. If I hit the 0, that's the point I want to edit. So I can type in here 615.9 and it will update it. A lot of times when you make these changes, it'll pull over to this Events tab. You just have to change it back. And you can see now the slope between them is 0. which is exactly what we want. We'll do this one. This is the cross slope of the sidewalk. If we click on it and hit the elevation editor, you can see it kept the point from before, but it made this one 0 because we grip edited this feature line to a polyline that was at elevation 0. So this time, instead of typing in my elevation of 615.9, I'm going to say this sidewalk should have a 2% cross slope. So I'm going to grade ahead from this known point, select the slope, and I'm going to type -2 for -2%, and it updated this point to be 615.90. Okay, next up, I'm going to show you how to set constant elevation points, or a constant elevation across several points. So we're going to do this top of curb. I'm going to select the elevation editor, and you can see it has the 2 points that we already set at 615.9. But I want all of these to be 615.9. So I'm going to make my first one 615.9 by grading at 0% back to the beginning. And then I'm going to select all of these points, which the way I did that was by clicking one, holding shift, and clicking the last one. And then this button right here allows you to grade at either a constant grade or constant elevation over several points. So just to show you what it'll do, if I hit constant grade, it's going to interpolate all of these midpoints from 615.9 to 0. I'll do it so you can see what it does. And the surface must be on rebuild automatic because it made that ugly mess covering 616 feet from end to end. Obviously that's not what we want, so we're going to select all the points again. I'm going to hit the button for flatten greater elevations, and this time I'm going to hit constant elevation and hit OK. And it's going to make all of the points on the line the same elevation as the first one I selected. So now that whole line's the same, which is what we want. Okay, next up, I'm going to show you how to raise and lower a feature line. So we'll raise and lower this section of parking lot by 6 inches. So I'm going to select the feature lines that make up that parking lot. And okay, I got them all. So we're going to raise and lower these feature lines by 6 inches. I'm going to select them. I'm going to right click and I'm going to hit raise lower. And now I type in the elevation difference the same way we did for the surface. So I'm going to raise it by 0.5 feet. And you can see the contours move in the parking lot. The spot elevations moved automatically, which is the beauty of using a surface to label this stuff, so I don't have to go in and type all of these spot elevations all over again. So that's how you raise and lower. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is how to use the quick elevation editor to make changes. In this case, it'll be to a parking lot, but it could also be to a sidewalk or a curb ramp, whatever it may be. So the way you do it, you click on any of the feature lines that are on the site that you want to make changes to. So I click one to get my menu to pop up. And then this button that has the line with the lightning bolt is called Quick Elevation Edit. When you select that, it allows you to mouse over all of the feature lines on that site, and it'll tell you the slope or grade and the direction it's running. So if you look at that little green arrow that's at the right side of the 3 in the 2.3%, that tells you the direction that I'm looking at right now. And the grade shows minus 2.33, which makes sense because it's running downhill. If I go to this side, the arrow flips and it's running uphill. This lets me control which direction I want to adjust. You can do this on lines. You can also mouse over a point and it'll give you the elevation. To make a change, you mouse over what you want to change. So I'm going to say that this isn't going to be 2.3% anymore. I'm going to click and it wants a new slope. So we're going to make it -2. I do that, it adjusts my label because it updated the surface and it made the grade 2%. And you can see this updated the 2.4 because this endpoint changed, and everything is live and it depends on each other, which is the benefit of using the feature lines. So that's -2. Let's say I want this to be -2 as well. So I moused over, I clicked, and I hit type -2, enter. That adjusted, the contours moved, the slope of our ridge adjusted. All of that stuff is really a quick way to make modifications, and it's very beneficial to get things done. And you can see very quickly how changing one point can change other parts of your design. So since I changed this face of curb, I'll show you how to also change the top elevation. It's a 6-inch height curb, so I'm going to mouse over my top of curb, and I'm just going to do the math. Okay, the face is 14.7, so now the top has to be 15.2. So I'm going to type 615.2, hit enter, it updates, contour updated, that updated. We can do the same thing down here, and we'll make that 614.2. And there you go. So that's the quick elevation editor. It's extremely useful. Yeah. All right, so that is that stuff. We're going to jump back into the presentation quick, and I think we are done. Control 1. Okay. So with that, that's how to create feature lines, how to modify feature lines, how to create, modify, and label surfaces, and a quick overview of sites, which we covered a couple months ago. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute or type something in the chat. I'll give you a minute or so to respond. And if not, that's okay too. In the meantime, while people are deciding if they have any questions or not, just as a upcoming deal, next month we're doing part 2 of the grading tools, which is going to be grading objects. These interact directly with the feature lines and surfaces that we did this month. So if there's anything you don't understand from this month, I would recommend watching the YouTube video or checking in with someone who uses them a lot to help get you up to speed before next month, because it will be good to know going in. So I don't see any questions in the chat. At this point, we will end the session for today. Thanks to everyone for logging in and joining. Again, this should be on YouTube within the next day or two, I would imagine. Thanks. Have a great day.